Hello and welcome again, everybody, to Clean Regime Health Coaching. I'm your host, Mike Espinola. Great to see everybody as usual. Excuse me. Today's subject is going to be GMOs. I know we've talked a little bit about it, and I'm sure everyone's excited to get moving on this information and learn some more about it. Now, we're not going to cover everything today. It's just too much information, but we're going to touch a little bit upon it and try to introduce to those that have no idea what genetically modified foods are, what they are, what they're all about, how dangerous they are, and how they are affecting our health. Now, we talked about this before, the chemical companies. These are the people that are modifying our food. So that concept in itself is already kind of disheartening to me, that a chemical company is in charge of the food. Chemicals, food. So what I'm trying to achieve is healthy food that lacks chemicals. So any food created by a chemical company, I just can't imagine is congruent with that concept, and therefore, I would probably try to avoid it. So chemical companies, modifying foods. Two types of basic modifications that are taking place, and there's new technologies happening all the time. This is the basics, or the basic two types of modification that take place in agriculture in reference to vegetation: corn, soy, cottonseed, sugar beets, those types of things. So the two different types would be the poison drinkers and the poison producers. Now, the poison drinkers are called from Monsanto, which is one of the chemical companies that make genetically modified foods, as well as a lot of different chemicals. They call theirs Roundup Ready, and that would be the poison drinker. Now, Roundup is an herbicide. So an herbicide kills vegetation, correct? And how it does this is by trapping nutrients. It traps the nutrients so the plant can't get to it, and then the plant dies from lack of nutrients. Now, the problem is we want to be able to use an herbicide to kill the weeds and the undesirable plant life that's growing with our crops, but not kill the crop itself, right? Sounds great. So that's why we have the resulted modified foods, poison drinkers, Roundup Ready crops. Now, how this is done, this is the real problem. This is disheartening to me and should be to you. The basic concept here for modifying foods is they take disease or DNA from different types of bacteria or viruses and insert it into your food to genetically modify the food. Now, if you have any kind of understanding of genetics and DNA and food and disease, that should be immediately set off red flags, because I know it did for me. So, the poison drinkers, the Roundup Ready crops, they found a bacteria that was able to survive in a toxic waste area that had Roundup, or more specifically glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. So they had the brilliant idea of, why don't we take the DNA that allowed the bacteria to survive with the Roundup and insert it into the food. So now, in theory, we can spray all the crops and all our fields with Roundup, and it's going to kill all the vegetation that we don't want, but it's going to leave behind the corn or soy or whatever it is you're growing, because that has been modified to be able to withstand the application of Roundup. Now, it sounds great, from a business point of view, again, for the chemical company, and then possibly for the farmers too, if it makes their life easier, or gives them higher yields, or allows them to produce more due to less vigorous labor or what have you. But chemicals, as we know, are a big problem. It's what causes health problems. So now not only do we have chemicals around our food, but we also have chemicals within the food. Because it's already been shown that the glyphosate does not wash off, it does not biodegrade, it builds up, it gets in the soil and can be retaken up out of the soil by the plant. So, due to these Roundup Ready crops, tons and tons and tons and tons of more Roundup is being used. And we're actually acidifying the ocean at the end of the Mississippi River due to all the chemicals being used in agriculture getting out into the ocean. Acidifying the ocean is death for all of us. So that's a big problem. There's way too many chemicals being used. They come out with these new ideas, these new upgrades, these new technologies, but they're only making things worse. That's what's going on. We're using more glyphosate than ever before as a result of this. Now, herbicide is only one problem, right? We got insects to deal with as well. So, a second type of genetically modified food would be the Bt crops. Now, these crops have been spliced with the DNA from a bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis, if you will. I think that's right. It's close. That lives in the soil naturally and produces its own insecticide, which we call the Bt toxin. Now, the Bt toxin has been synthesized and has been used for years. In theory, somewhat safe, or partially safe, or not completely safe, but not the worst thing in the environment either. Still not good in my opinion. So this Bt toxin has been used, and since supposedly it has been used safely, they got the brilliant idea of taking the DNA from this bacteria and putting it into the food. So what these Bt crops do is they actually produce within each cell of the plant produces Bt toxin, produces its own insecticide. So now, when we talk about using chemicals on plants, we want to use them in a fashion where they serve a purpose, but then they can wash away and be gotten rid of before we consume it, right? That's been the concept or the excuse or the story right along. Well, in this case, there's no escaping it. It's being produced within the cell of the plant itself, the Bt toxin. Now, one of the ramifications, or one of the things that happened due to the insertion of this DNA into the food, is that the Bt toxin is created within the plant at thousands or 10,000s of times the amount that the natural bacteria would have created in the soil. So now there's all this extra Bt toxin being created. And again, it's being created within the cell of the plant itself. Studies have shown with people that still pick crops by hand, like cotton, for example, when they pick the Bt crops, they have all kinds of problems. Flu-like symptoms, skin issues, immune responses, and animals that have actually, fed on some of these crops, like cottonseed. In India, they grow cotton. They allowed 7 or 8 water buffalo to eat Bt cotton at the end of the season, to eat the cotton seeds, and they all died from eating it one day. So clearly the Bt toxin, the Bt crops are not safe. They cause a lot of health problems. And again, this information is being suppressed. On the surface we'll say, yeah, it's to protect money, which isn't good anyway. It's a reason that we can see and that we can believe in for now. But I believe that things are done for a lot of reasons, and it's not just money. But the Bt toxin that's produced in the plant is not safe. It's produced at too high of levels, and again, people that even work with these crops are experiencing health problems just by touching it, never mind eating it. Research has been done, independent studies. Scientists all over the world have been testing these different types of genetically modified foods, and they're being ridiculed, they're being shut down, they're losing their funding, they're being exiled. So there's a lot of suppression, again, in the real information about what's going on with the GMO crops. We talked about the Roundup being used more aggressively and more tons. That's the environmental effects. The other problem with GMOs on the environment is that the dander and the pollen from these crops are getting out into the ecosystem. Now, these are new techniques. This is, in my mind, playing God. And this isn't something that can, once we find out is problematic, that we can recall, because we've already released it into the ecosystem, into the environment. And that's what I mean by these genetic mutations, if you will, destroying the environment as well as our health. So another issue with the BT crops, and soy has rumored to be one of the worst ones. Again, the BT crop contains the DNA from the bacteria that makes the BT toxin naturally in the soil. So it's DNA from bacteria. Well, most of us by now know that we have bacteria living in our gut. A lot of us might know today that gut bacteria is an issue. A lot of us know today that gut bacteria is 90% of your immune system. A lot of us know today that leaky gut has become more and more of a problem. And some of us know that leaky gut leads to a lot of different diseases. Diseases that you wouldn't necessarily decide correlate or correspond or connect, but crazy stuff can go on inside the body when things aren't going right, and when you add a lot of different chemicals that don't belong there. But another one of the possible ramifications of consuming the BT crops, because they contain the DNA from the bacteria, that when you consume it, it can actually mutate your own gut bacteria and turn your gut into a BT insecticide factory. Now, clearly we know that situation is not good. Okay, we have probiotics. We have bacteria that lives in our gut, that lives in harmony with us and protects us. So the last thing we want to do is genetically mutate that bacteria. Now the other issue is that the BT toxin that kills the insects, literally how it does this is by punching holes in the intestines of the insect, and it dies. Well, that's a form of leaky gut. It's just not, it's just a little more extreme because it's in a bug. So we have leaky gut issues, and we have genetically modified crops that contain a toxin that causes leaky gut. Any questions? I didn't think so. Kind of sells itself, don't it? Now again, there's a lot more to this GMO. We're going to be bringing you more and more information as we get it. Again, Jeffrey Smith. He is the guy. He's the founder of the Institution for Responsible Technology, and his biggest problem is GMOs. And the guy has been working his butt off to honestly save us all from these things, because if it wasn't for him, things could be a lot worse than they are now. So we're trying to educate people, because by deciding not to buy GMO foods is going to push them out of the market. And that's what Jeff's mission is to educate the consumer. And we don't need 100% either, because we're not going to convince everybody. Some people, like some doctors, still don't think food and health correlate with one another, which I know is absurd, but they still believe that. We're not going to convince everybody, but the more people we can convince, the more noise we make about these GMOs and how bad they are and how bad they are for our health and the environment, we can push them out of the market. And that's the plan. That's what we're trying to do. And we're in the process of doing that for you, and we need you to join us. So spread the word about the GMOs. Unfortunately, to avoid GMO, you either have to buy non-GMO verified food or organic food. And even then, there is certain amounts of contamination, because another way the environment is being destroyed is, again, that pollen. So I'm over here trying to grow organic corn, and a mile down the road, they're growing Monsanto's GMO, BT or Roundup Ready, don't matter. So now that dander travels through the air, bees, what have you, and gets over on my crops. In my opinion, I have just been contaminated. My beautiful organic crops have been contaminated and destroyed. I want recourse. Here's what happens. Monsanto finds out that you have their genetic makeup in your crops, which again, we know how it happened. They now own your crops, and they can fine you for having their crops being grown on your land without buying their seeds. So, again, the whole game is rigged in their favor. The powers that be. So we can beat them on this one. It's imperative that we do, and we can't let it go much longer. In the last 5 years, we've gone from 5 major crops to 9 major crops being genetically modified. They're turning to animals. They've already released into the wild a genetically modified salmon. So, in my opinion, never eat salmon again.